Roxy, I have a new quiz for us.
I hope it's about Harry Potter.
I'm getting Ravenclaw vibes from you.
And I'm getting Slytherin vibes from you.
Really? Isn't that the evil one? Isn't that like Voldemort's camp or something? Well, now today's quiz is going to sound really boring in comparison. It's actually about our attachment style.
Yeah, that does sound less fun than a sorting hat.
Well, you can still use your wand.
Yes!
From Religion News Service, this is Saved by the City, a podcast from two single Christian women who stepped off the bus in New York with all our baggage. I'm Katelyn Beatty.
And I'm Roxy Stone.
Okay, so pivoting pretty hard away from Harry Potter.
Do we have to?
What? We can find a way to come back to it. I think I have never read Harry Potter.
Every season this comes up. Every season it will astonish and bother me.
I know. I know. I get it. It's not for spiritual reasons, like, oh, where's the magic from? I think I was just too old when the books became
I'm
really
older
popular.
than you.
Yeah, but you have a really strong fantasy streak.
That's true. That is true.
Don't you actually have a Harry Potter wand?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
2 feet behind me.
Exactly. Which I love and affirm. We're just different people.
I am not worried about me having a wand. I embrace that.
Okay, so we will talk about Harry Potter later, but first, when you think about God, what image comes to mind? What does God look like to you?
Is this a trick question? This feels like a trick question. God doesn't have a body, right?
No, God doesn't have a body, but I mean, how do you picture God? I was thinking of this quote from A.W. Tozer, the late pastor and author. He said, "What comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us." I don't know if I agree with him, but I think it's an interesting claim.
Yes. And, I think a lot of people have, sky daddy images, like this angry white man in the sky.
Actually, when you say sky daddy, I think more like like a 55-year-old divorcee who has a lot of money and is going to maybe like fund my college education.
Is that how you see God?
Well, when you say sky daddy, yes. But yes, a lot of us have like old white man
ready
images.
To mete out punishment whenever we mess up.
Right. And it's interesting because as Christians, we have this image of Jesus that kind of refutes that image. But a lot of us still kind of sense that God is an angry dad. Like he's going to snap at any minute, or he's waiting for us to mess up, or he's waiting for us to get our act together before we can approach him. It's not really a God that's super approachable.
Yeah, I recently had a revelation that I think I maybe thought of God more that way as a kid, and now I think of God more as a therapist, but not in a great way. Not in a like, oh, tell me about your problems and your life and like I'll help you sort it out. But like the kind of like therapist sitting in the chair judging you the whole time and being like, oh, you're saying that, but really what your history and what your past and what your secret shameful desires are, like knows everything behind what I'm saying and sort of is just like smiling at how like I don't understand myself and continue to do dumb things as a result or whatever.
Okay, it sounds like you've had a bad therapist.
I had a great therapist. But I think I have this, like whenever I read like therapists talking about patients, they have insight into the patient that the patient doesn't understand about themselves. And that's kind of how I see God, but I see it as more of like judgmental than like, let me help you understand yourself, which is what a therapist does. I see it more as like, just doesn't understand. Doesn't get it.
It is not a posture of love. It's more scrutiny or, wow, you just keep messing up.
Yeah. Or like, like, oh, you say you want this great job, but really you're searching for fulfillment in all of the wrong places. Or what you're really trying to do is fill this hole of affirmation in you, like that kind of always analyzing, but like God knows and knows that like everything that you really want, you think you want for certain reasons, but like there's so many layers underneath that of subconscious, and you'll never know that about yourself, but God does.
Is this therapist a man?
Oh, yeah.
Is this therapist over the age of 50?
Yeah. And the office is stuffy. Yeah. And he frowns at me a lot, for sure. He's like, this silly girl.
Ouch. Well, we are in this session, or no, not session. I'm not going to be your therapist, but we're going to unpack like where that came from and what that means and why it might actually hinder how you relate to God.
And today's guest, coincidentally a therapist, is going to help us understand how the ways we see God are actually related to arise from our attachment styles.
Most of us have probably heard the term attachment or attachment style. It's essentially how we relate to others to meet our base needs for love and acceptance. And our parents have a lot to do with it.
But before we talk to Krispin Mayfield, let's figure out what our attachment styles are.
Ready for the quiz?
Here we go.
I mean, take this with a grain of salt. I literally Googled attachment styles quiz, you know.
These are complicated. I have a hard time remembering and discussing them. Oh, well, that's obvious.
I often find eye contact uncomfortable.
Tend to prefer a relationship with things or animals instead of people.
I thought of you. Okay, so that was a little brutal.
Well, they've given us this helpful pie chart of our results, categorized into the 4 different attachment styles. But maybe first, let's define the attachment styles.
Yeah, so secure attachment is the gold star, is what we want. It's basically, it's a ability to open up to others, to give and receive love, to have healthy boundaries, and a balance of intimacy with a sense of individual self. But needless to say, all of us struggle to some extent with secure attachment. So what are some of the other ways that we might attach?
Well, we've got avoidant, ambivalent, and disorganized.
Check, check, and check.
Avoidant being your lone wolf types. Avoidant people are disattached. They find their greatest struggle to be lack of emotion and connection within relationships.
Ambivalent attachment is there's a tendency to be dissatisfied. There's a sense that you're always reaching for attachment, but there's something wrong, either with yourself or with the other person, like unattainable ideals.
And the last one, disorganized. This is sort of your classic, come here, go away, come here, go away, come here, go away attachment style.
What does that mean?
Well, imagine, well, you don't have to imagine because you can see me. Listeners, imagine what I'm doing. I'm doing the classic, like beckoning you closer with one hand and putting the other hand out to keep you away. Like signaling you want someone to come closer, but then in your actions, keeping them at a distance or vice versa. Mixed messages.
Mixed messages. And this likely came from, as a wee one, receiving mixed messages from your caregiver about their availability to you. Like reaching out for love and affection but don't come too close. Unfortunately, a lot of this goes back to our parents.
Which, Rocky, Sherry,
Tim and Karen.
Maybe you guys take a little break. Press pause for a while.
Or, well, I guess it's also worth saying that all of us have all of us have expressions of all the attachment styles at different stages and different relationships, depending on how well we're doing. It's not like you're born with an attachment style. It's just a way of describing how we relate to others at different times.
Exactly. But now I'm feeling like you're stalling. So let's hear it.
Well, the biggest piece of my pie, avoidant.
Huh.
I feel like it might be obvious because I'm so independent.
Of course.
And like someone hugging me, like a friend hugging me for too long makes me anxious. Like, okay, that's enough. Let's maintain some distance.
Yeah.
I think there can be, in unhealthy moments, maybe a fear of intimacy or a fear of like, if I'm too attached to someone, I'll like lose myself, you know, or I'll lose my sense of self. So I have to keep distance in order to maintain that. I think psychologists would say the avoidant attachment is really about having the experience of not having your needs met early on. So you learn like it's just better to kind of bottle them up or push them down or deal with them on your own. It's not that you don't have emotions. It's not that you don't have needs. It's that you learned early on better to just like try to deal with it on my own than to reach out. Because if I reach out and the needs aren't met, that's very painful. I'm going to guess ambivalent.
Ding, ding, ding. Yeah. And I mean, this is really, when we read the descriptions, I was like, oh, well, yeah, that's me. I mean, I think I have a lot of insecurity about being left or abandoned, and, you know, question a lot of what I'm doing in the relationship. Is the other person happy? Am I upsetting them? And then I think I do have a tendency to kind of go all in and lose myself in a relationship. And I think I can look back at a pattern of like feeling pretty good going into a relationship about myself and my life and my independence. And then by the end of a relationship, feeling like trash. So,
well, I'll just say not all of that is you. The other person in the relationship might have some bearing on how
attachment styles also, I think, have a tendency to factor into who you're attracted to.
Yes. So. Yes, definitely. If you have such different attachment styles that it's not going to work. Like,
yeah, or that they're really triggering like the bad stuff of your attachment.
Yes.
Style.
Yes. Like in past relationships, if I sense that the other person like really needs me or what I experience to be clingy, I'll like push even farther away. Like I will run from and then that will just kick it up even more on their end, you know?
Yes.
Like it's a bad cycle for both of us.
It is. And I'm oddly attracted to people who are like emotionally unavailable in that way. And like if I'm with somebody who's clingy, I'm like, oh, they must not really see me or know me because they like think I'm like they don't see my dark side, you know? So I don't do well with people who are needy either, but I actually think that'd probably be helpful for me.
Well, or at least someone who's like,
maybe not.
I'm
clingy.
not idealizing you, but I don't think you're trash. That's not I've just heard like in general, that's not something to look for.
I've heard that too. Maybe from a therapist that wasn't God. All right. Well, this is not supposed to be an episode about our romantic relationships.
But it makes sense because apart from our parents, like early on, that's where those dynamics will be kicked up the most intensely, you know?
Absolutely.
And we've learned a lot from life experience. We have a lot of stories.
I don't know what you're saying. You're saying we're old. That's what I'm hearing.
No, that's not what I was saying. We're wise women. We've gleaned wisdom from life.
All right.
Someone else who has a lot of wisdom is our guest today, Krispin Mayfield, author of the new book, Attached to God, A Practical Guide to Deeper Spiritual Experience.
Basically, attachment science is the study of relationships and how we attach to the other important people in our life, and then also to God, which is what I focus on.
Krispin is a licensed professional counselor. He also makes dope TikTok videos.
Our conversation with Krispin is coming right up just after the break.
Religion News Service is an independent, award-winning source of global reporting on religion, spirituality, culture, and ethics.
From Jonathan Merritt's On Faith and Culture to Omar Suleiman's Islam Beyond Phobia to Jana Reese's Flunking Sainthood, there's something for everybody.
If you like what we're doing at Saved by the City, let us know. Throw us a rating or a review. It goes a long way toward helping get the word out about the show.
One reviewer says these lively conversations are compelling, relevant, and relatable. Katelyn and Roxy are intelligent, honest, and witty, and they have an excellent lineup of guests.
I like that person.
That might have been one of our moms now that I think about it.
Well, be like our moms. Let us know what you think by emailing us at sbtcpodcast@religionnews.com.
Today's guest is Krispin Mayfield, author of the new book, Attached to God. Welcome, Krispin.
Hey, Krispin.
Thanks. I'm so glad to be here and excited to talk about attachment. So,
Yes, us too.
Just really starting off basic, how would you define what an attachment style is?
basically, attachment science is the study of relationships and how we attach to the other important people in our life. And it started with toddlers, really infants, and looking at these different ways that they attach to their mothers. But then we found out that that actually plays out through the rest of life. And we have some of these similar strategies when it comes to attaching to our partners or even friendships and that sort of thing. And then also to God, which is what I focus on. But really, this attachment styles thing is we have lots of different ways to get closeness and connection with the people that we love. So the first one is anxious.
Okay.
And that is kind of this idea of like, I need to cling to you to make sure you don't go anywhere. And so this looks like an infant that like, instead of like exploring the playground is like clinging on to mom's skirt, and just like hanging there because it's like, I'm worried that if I go somewhere else, you're not going to stick around for me. In adulthood with partners, this looks like that person that is like, and I will include myself in this of like, oh, you haven't like texted me in 2 hours. Like, is something wrong? Like, I need that constant connection to know that we're okay. There's not like a feeling of like, there's a stability here that goes beyond what I can see. And so that would be that anxious attachment. And we're even taught in the church to do this, to be so preoccupied with, is our relationship with God okay, that it makes it hard to focus sometimes on the other things that are really important, like our family. So that's an overview of the first one.
Anxious attachment. Okay.
And then the second one is shutdown, which is also sometimes called avoidant, is the person that is like, I'm okay on my own. I can manage my emotions on my own. I don't really have many emotions. This is someone that actually has learned, if I share my emotions, then I'm going to drive other people away.
So it's in order to maintain the connection, it's better for me to keep my feelings down rather than express them, because expressing feelings pushes people away.
Right, exactly. So you think about like that kid that, and this happens a lot with boys in particular in our culture, where it's like, if you're scared or you're crying, it's like, that's not okay. And so this kid learns like, all right, if I want to keep connection with my parents, I need to, handle things on my own. And then you grow up into someone you become so detached from your emotions. That's just been your way of like dealing with emotions, is pretending like they don't exist. And so then you kind of go through life and it's like, yeah, I'm just like logical, I'm rational. And under that though is like, yeah, if I were to share my emotions, it would drive other people away. And then we see that with God where, if I'm sad or if I'm worried about something, it means there's something wrong with my faith.
Okay. So in relation to God, kind of working more from a cerebral or intellectual structure, because that feels safer than honestly expressing emotions.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And kind of going in that like systematic theology route of like, I have all the like knowledge, right? And because I have this knowledge, then I can spiritually bypass my emotions. So it's like, I'm not worried. Like God's in control, right? Like that's actually a way of stuffing down those emotions.
And what about the third one?
The third one is shame-filled. And this is this idea of I want to be close to you, but I've also gotten this message that there's something about me that's broken or deformed or disgusting. And so with infants, this looks like a kid that's in an abusive or emotionally neglectful home, where it's like part of me wants to be connected to my parent, and then part of me is worried if I get close, I'm going to get hit, something like that. And this was actually where the thinking about attachment and faith started for me, because what we found with kids that have gone through a lot of trauma is they have this feeling like there's something at my core that's disgusting or broken or wrong. And if other people get close to me, they'll find out who I really am and they'll run away. Mm-hmm. And that to me sounded so familiar to what I was taught in Sunday school, which is like your heart is dirty and like the core of who you are is broken. And if God really saw who you are, God would want to run away. And you need Jesus to like be sort of like a Jesus mask to keep God from seeing who you really are.
Mm-hmm. If anybody listening is kind of familiar with therapy, they've thought probably or about attachment style, or maybe they even just read like a book about marriage. They kind of learned about these things. But when I first heard about your book, I was like, I have never thought about applying that to God before. As you started to dig into it, why did you kind of find like, wow, this is really important for us to think about as we think about how we relate to God and what we were taught about God and how to feel about God?
I really like that question because that hits on two of the reasons that I wrote this. One was, as I looked at the research, it just really helped me make sense of a lot of the feelings that I had growing up in the church. And so it's, thinking about like, if you're given this message that you're just one slip up away from losing your faith, right? Of course you're going to feel anxious. And actually, like what we saw with the infants is they were sort of resentful towards their mom. They were like, I need you, but I'm mad about how much I need you. And I'm mad that it's so hard to keep connection with you. And I was like, as an adult thinking about my relationship with God, I relate to that a lot. And then the shame-filled part, that also made so much sense to me to think, oh yeah, like if I'm told my whole life, God is really holy and God hates sin, like, and then I can't be holy enough, like at least I can like hate the unholy parts of myself, which actually kind of can lead to like self-hatred. So that was the first half of it. And then the second half was, it's interesting, in the psychology community, there is a lot of confidence in religion to be a positive thing. And so, we think about, there's a lot of, we have a lot of difficult relationships in our lives. But what if your relationship with God is also another point of stress? I think about myself as a teenager, and so many of us as teenagers, if you were in that evangelical circle of like, you're trying to figure so many things out. And for me, like, relationship with God on top of everything else was a big stressor. It wasn't like, oh, here's this like resource of like, I can feel calm and peaceful and like get restoration. It was like, am I doing enough? Like, get my Passion CD and like get on my knees and try to like pray for an hour and stuff like that.
Keep the fire for God going.
You're totally on fire, but like unless you do specific things every day, the fire will dwindle and then God will be disappointed in you. So you need to find ways to keep the fire and the passion going.
While also keeping the horniness down, because that's
right,
bad.
Exactly.
Yes, I wasn't thinking in those terms. I never struggled with that.
When I think teenage years.
Sure.
How do I think? I think, how do I love God and not boys?
Yes.
Right, yes.
So of the three types of attachments, which do you think is the most pervasive among people who grew up in evangelical contexts? Is there a specific attachment style that we really have ingrained?
I think it depends on what kind of evangelicalism we're talking about. So I see that anxious piece showing up a lot more in like charismatic circles of like,
That makes sense.
You have to be happy, you have to have joy, you have to have faith.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I remember growing up and feeling like, okay, God doesn't like me, but when I get to heaven, I will no longer be sinful. I'll be changed in an instant, and then God will like me.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this element of like, kind of like makeover boyfriend, like rom-com thing of like, he's a slob now and he's terrible, but like with some like polish, like
With some
then
Jesus
he'll be good.
polish.
Exactly. And it's kind of funny, but like thinking about if you are that person that's really just struggling with feeling like I'm lovable,
Mm-hmm.
That means that the message from the church, people that are struggling with feeling okay about themselves and feeling worthy of love aren't getting that message. They're getting the message of like, well, maybe like God's keeping you around because someday you might be worthy of God liking you.
Mm-hmm. We've talked about the problems of these 3 attachment styles. When you're in therapy, when you're working with clients, like what is your end goal when they are struggling with these kind of attachment styles? Which obviously my end goal is like, how then do we apply it to God? But how, like, what is a healthy attachment style? What are we aiming for here?
Yeah. So we're looking for someone that, this sense of like, I know that you're there for me. I know that you're emotionally responsive, and I know that you delight in me. And so when I think about secure attachment, I think about that person in your life that when you walk in, their face lights up, right? And there's just that sense of like, this person really likes me. This person really delights in me. There's actually research around delight being the biggest predictor of secure attachment. And so that idea of it's something that you feel with the nonverbals. It's not always just the words that are said, but it's like the body language. It's the, touch. Sometimes it's the tone of voice that says there's emotional safety here. We're together. We're on the same team. I'm here for you. This is a safe relationship.
So as we finish up here, I'm wondering if you might offer our listeners some homework as they go into this next week. How might they like consider what is my attachment style to God, and what are some ways to try to counter that or to try to make it healthy?
Yeah. One of the things that I try to work when we talk about working towards security, you can't just make yourself feel differently or operate differently. One of the things that I really tried to do with this book was create a space for people to say like, oh yeah, that's what I've been feeling. That's the insecurity I've been feeling. And so I think this next week, noticing what are the ways that I try to keep connection with God. Can I name that in some way? And is it something that feels healing and life-giving, or does it feel like something I'm white knuckling? Because of course we're going to do things to connect with God. We have our spiritual practices, but there's a huge difference between I'm doing this because it is for my good and it's something that helps me feel connected to God versus I'm doing this to keep God happy, and I'm worried that if I don't do this, God's not going to stick around.
Right.
Like getting at the motive of what's the why behind the spiritual practices. Am I able to come to God kind of openly hoping to connect, or is it, okay, I'm showing up because I know this is what you want me to do and this is what good Christians do, and so please don't abandon me. Which is just a different posture.
Right. Yeah. And if that's what you feel, that's like good. Like, I'm glad that you noticed that and just having that conversation with God to say like, this is how I feel. Like, it feels like you're going to abandon me if I don't do the things I'm supposed to do. And so I want to take a step of faith right now to do something different, to trust that you love me more than I feel like you do. Right. To get to kind of like take that risk. And it is a big risk. So I want to validate that part.
What kind of attachment style do you think you are, Roxy?
Gosh. Well, I can recognize myself, in all three. I mean, as I'm
not uncommon.
Sure most people can. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I definitely feel I really feel like I have all three.
Put you on the spot.
I've been thinking about it, but I mean, I'm like, every time I want to say it's anxiety, I'm like, oh, but it's really shame. Oh no, but I really, I really feel like I have a lot of all three. I mean, I can definitely think about right now in this moment. I think there's like a bit of, I feel like the anxiety attachment is maybe being proven true a little bit, of like that feeling of, I don't feel like I've done the things to connect with God that I feel like I should be doing. And so I don't feel connected to God. And I'm like, see, exactly what I thought. So
I think as a teenager and young adult, I was anxious because I wanted to keep the fire going.
Right.
And then at some point I had a season, a period of time when I was doing all the things and I didn't feel the connection to God. And so I went into shutdown. Like, it's not safe to try to connect with God because God doesn't show up, or it doesn't show up consistently. So it's safer to rest in a kind of intellectual framework of faith. And you can't be too dependent on God showing up, because God won't, and then it'll be even worse.
Right.
Than if you never reached out at all. And I'm not blaming this on my mom, by the way. I know that like when we talk about this, it's like, well, it's probably how your mom treated you when you were an infant. And I do not have her in mind.
Right. Yeah.
When I say that, but yeah, I'm sure our listeners are like, oh, I can recognize myself in that, or I was more in that attachment style, and now I think I've moved into this. But that security, like a secure attachment, is what we hope for, and what's life-giving, like what we need as people.
Thanks for sharing, both of you.
I really wasn't planning that, and then I got curious and wanted to see where it would go. So, well, what about you, Krispin? We didn't even ask you.
Yeah. I definitely resonate with the shame-filled attachment style. And so it's been a really lovely thing to identify and start to like figure out, what does it look like to be moving towards security. And for me, that's meant, we talk about that person that like lights up when you walk in the room. I have been able to rely on some important friendships to me and kind of think like, okay, well, what if God felt about me the way that my friend Mark does? Like that would be really different than what I've always felt. So kind of hacking my attachment system that way.
Like, yeah, if my friend is this delighted in me, think of how much more God, who created my inmost being, is delighted in me. Yeah, that's really helpful.
Which is, I mean, that shame-filled part, I think you just hit on something really important, which is God knows you better than anyone. Right. And if you're given a message of like, well, the person that knows you better than anyone thinks that you're disgusting or displeasing, like that is so painful. And so I think that's why it's been really important to me to like think about attachment science, but also go back to scripture and say like, is there a better, like more healing story here? Because I think that God does delight in people. God created us. And if the best we have to hope for is like, well, God's keeping you around, but he doesn't really like you. That's not a very good news.
This is a lot. I mean, I think I'm really, it's been really great to talk to you. And I think this is really important for a lot of people to explore. And I think, we've talked a lot about just church wounds and hurts and ways that people of our generation at our age now are really grappling with some of how we grew up and how we were, taught to God by all kinds of well-meaning people, taught to think about God. But, we're apparently our evangelical generation's midlife crisis is an existential one about God and church. So I think this is really an important contribution to that just general awakening and conversation people are having. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much,
Thank
Krispin.
you. Thanks so much.
I had not really considered that much how my attachment style might relate to how I think about God until coming across Crispin's work on this. And now it seems really obvious, which I think is what like a great book does, is sort of say, you're like, oh yeah, of course. And that is really how I feel after thinking about this and talking to Crispin about it.
So going back to an anxious attachment style, how do you feel like that has shaped your relationship with God?
I mean, I think we can go back to my idea of like this therapist that's not a very kind therapist or a very gentle therapist. That's actually like a very judgmental therapist. Like that is so much of how when I think about an ambivalent or anxious relationship attachment style, I feel judged by the other person regularly. Like I feel like I'm falling short, letting them down. I'm worried about how they're feeling. I'm worried about how things I've done have upset them. And I think I have this sense, I often have this sense in relationships, and I've actually talked about this in therapy before, of like, I feel like the other person knows me better than me, and that they're the ones that like can see the dark side of me, and I'm just fooling myself into thinking that isn't there. And so that is, again, kind of how I would describe some of the ways that I think about God is like, God knows this darkness inside of me, and that's always part of how God views me.
I mean, there's a lot of theology that would kind of feed into that or reinforce that sense as well.
Yeah, this sort of like this omnipresent, omniscient God, this all-knowing God that, again, when that's directed at me, and there's all these mysteries of the psyche that, our great psychoanalysts of the ages have figured out, like God knows all of that, and then of course is like judging it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm even thinking like teaching that we probably heard growing up, like God, even if other people don't know, God knows when you do something bad. Like God can see, he sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. No wonder we think that God looks like Santa Claus. But kind of this like all-knowing presence that's looking for signs of you slipping up, looking for signs of you being bad. And so
it's not even enough to not sin. You can't even want to sin. Like God knows
the motives.
Yeah. If you look at the Bible verse about like looking at a woman with lust is, an affair, or as bad as an affair, like that kind of sense of even the motivations.
Yes. God knows the inner heart and its workings. And man, what's in there is really, really bad.
Depraved, if you will.
And I will. Totally depraved, one might say.
And how about you?
Yeah.
What is I'm actually curious because I'm not an avoidant personality as much. So like, what does that feel like when it comes to God? How do you avoid God?
That's a good question. This came up in season 2, my senior year of college. I had a major depressive episode and couldn't figure out what was going on, and spiritualized it, and really experienced that as like, God's not here. Like God, I don't know where God is, but God has left. God left me to fend for myself. I'm doing all these things to try to reconnect, and I don't feel connected at all. I feel like God is absent. And I think from that, I've probably moved into more of a head knowledge way of connecting with God, like, and maybe a sense like you can't really trust your emotions. You can't trust how you feel because your emotions are a jumble. So all that we have is like these intellectual statements about who God is and what God is like. And that's what you fall back on. But obviously that doesn't really translate well to when we talk about our relationship, like, and connecting. That doesn't really translate to a sense of closeness.
Well, it strikes me that at a time when you really needed God, it didn't feel like God was there. And so to get to a point where you could trust that God would be there again when you needed God is probably really hard and easier to just not need God.
Well said.
I'm just psychoanalyzing.
But this is like a nice therapist.
Yes. I was reading a book recently over the last few weeks called Maybe You Should Talk to Someone. And I would recommend that book, by the way.
Lori
which
Gottlieb.
Which is really all about therapy. It's written by a therapist. And like the way that she describes her patients and how much she loves them and cares for them. And even the moments when she's like, I know this person is kind of lying to themselves. It's like she has so much patience for them getting there and hope that they will. And I don't know why I can't feel like God has that for us, or for me.
Yeah, like a really good therapist or a really good friend or someone who's like, I delight in who you are. I want the best for you. Yes, I see that you are struggling or you're maybe not being honest with yourself, but like that is not the whole of who you are.
Right.
You also might have really good reasons for why you're acting in a certain way. Like, this makes sense. You're not. And is there a way to kind of latch on to how we experience other people who love us and care for us and think like, maybe God is like that? Like maybe, maybe God is actually that times 1,000. Like maybe how I receive care and how I see that this other person delights in me, maybe that's just a reflection of, or like an image of how God sees me.
I think one of the battles for me just in general is sort of fighting to love myself and feel lovable. And that feels very related to that. And, and when you have a sense of, this being that is supposed to be like this, like literally is love, and you can't feel that, then I think that's, I do think that says quite a bit about me. Maybe not the most important thing or everything, but I also think I'm sure there are ways to like, as Krispin talked about, like there's theology in that. And I think there's not just theology that we've been taught, but there's probably theology that we project onto other people and into how we view the world in general as maybe unfriendly or unloving or unlovable. I would have to think about that more because I do think I rarely see other people the way that I see myself. And I don't, and I'm not quite sure how that connects, but.
Right. You're not someone who is like, and other people are unlovable too. Like you find it easier to see other people as worthy of love than you do for yourself. So it's like, if I can extend that to my friend, why can't I extend it to myself?
Yeah. Saved by the City is a religion news service production. The producer is Jay Woodward and the consulting editor is Paul O'Donnell. We get production assistance from Elizabeth Joy Wyndham.
Chaz Rousseau put together our look, and Martin Fowler wrote our theme music.
We are Roxy Stone
and Caitlin Beatty.
Thanks for listening.